This is ArcGIS Enterprise Security. My name is Gregory Ponto. I'm a security architect with Esri Professional Services, and I'll let my colleague introduce himself.
My name is Jeff Smith. I'm a product engineer for the Portal server team with a focus on security. And before we get started, I just wanted to kind of break the ice with everyone here and tell, I'm not a comedian, but I want to tell a joke. It's a security joke and it's a little corny, but does anyone here know why you can't use beef stew as a password? Thoughts, ideas? Because it's not stroganoff.
Oh man, okay.
All right. Thank you. I won't quit my day job.
Okay, so we only have an hour and there's a ton of material to cover. Frankly, it's impossible to cover everything related to security in that length of time. We're going to hit three main topics. We're going to talk about security relative to ArcGIS Server, security relative to Portal for ArcGIS. The good news about that, I guess, is that if you don't necessarily leverage the full ArcGIS Enterprise federated servers, the content still is valuable or applicable to you. If you do, it's also applicable to you. So the content here kind of covers all the bases, depending on, regardless of what pattern you use. And then we'll also touch on some 10.5 features, at least as far as they relate to security. It's strongly recommended that those here have some existing background with ArcGIS Server and Portal, things like managing users and groups and roles. Now, if that's not your background or you haven't done that before, it's not the end of the world. I would, please do stay. The content doesn't necessarily require that information, but I'm just not going to be covering that here. But that content is covered on videos.esri.com. There's quite a bit of material there which talks about the basics of administering ArcGIS Server and Portal, users, roles, things like that, groups. What we're going to get into here is much more of the hardening aspect of these components, some things that you may not necessarily think about but are important to consider. And it's all based on the reality that we live in a time where breaches are common. A little breach of your laptop can lead to an access key being leaked and can, especially if you guys are administrators, potentially grant an attacker access to any number of data sets. And that's a breach of confidentiality, and that's very, very hard to rein in. Once the data is out there, it's very hard to bring it back. It's basically impossible to bring it back. And this is just one website that it's not Esri affiliated or anything, but Data Breach Today covers a lot of this kind of stuff. Almost every day you can see some of the new details. It may not necessarily hit your the headlines of CNN, but these things occur every day. So we really got to think about this stuff. Whether or not we want to or love it, it is the reality of the world we live in. So just a kind of a review of the concept of the ArcGIS Enterprise, which is what we're discussing, at least in the context of ArcGIS Server and Portal. This is the technology where we put Portal or ArcGIS Online as a security authenticator to provide access to services via ArcGIS Server, online content, things like that. And it's designed to really primarily to provide massive access to content and make content available more easily to end users. And when I started at Esri, this was almost a decade ago, we just had an API, and it was like up to you guys to figure out how to expose that content to users. But with Portal and ArcGIS Online technologies like that, and all the apps that have emerged even in the last 5 years or earlier, later than that, that data is now potentially in the hands of anyone and everyone, end users, and that's really great. That's really great, but it's very powerful. But it also creates a very powerful system for exposing that data and potentially exposing that data in ways you didn't expect. Under the covers, I refer to these components, this product Portal for ArcGIS, ArcGIS for Server, and the data store. These are the underlying components that make up the ArcGIS for Enterprise. Again, the content that we're covering here is applicable whether or not these are joined, whether or not you use all these pieces or not, it's still applicable to your environment. So if you just use ArcGIS Server, and I know that many of you are in that camp, and that's fine, the content is still applicable to that as well. So that's fine. So with that, we'll start with the GIS server. We're going to cover some hardening items. This basically all boils down to the security best practices that are documented in our help, and going into kind of some details of what they are and why we do them, what actually impact they have to your environment. All of the content that we're going to be covering basically interacts with the administrator directory in your ArcGIS server. So most of the advanced functions, hardening, things like that, ciphers, that's all in there. So it's all I'm kind of trying to indicate here is that much of what we're going to be covering, you'll be working with the administrator directory to implement if you choose to do so. So the first topic to cover is encryption in transit, HTTPS. It's basically not sending anything anymore over clear text over untrusted networks. And there used to be some debate over whether or not this was worthwhile to do, or was it worth the effort. And what's really happened is modern browsers, particularly Chrome, is very aggressive about securing their user experience such that they're actually starting to cut off functions in the browser if you don't access them over HTTPS. And a really big one for us is geolocation. So if you don't support HTTPS, you basically can't do geolocation over Chrome, and it's likely that the other browsers will follow suit eventually as well. So it's not a debate over whether or not you should do this. You really must do this, especially if you want to take advantage of the features that your customers likely desire. Like they don't want to have to tell you where they are. They want the browser to know. And you have to have HTTPS to do that as just a basic example. This is enabled by default in 10.4 and later. So if you're already at 10.4, it's already done. You don't have to do anything here. If you're concerned about what's going to happen if I do this, you can at least go HTTP and HTTPS to support both channels. But we do recommend, if you can, go to HTTPS only. It is actually easier to support an environment. I work in managed services, so I'm not just blowing smoke here. This is the reality of the world I live in too. We go HTTPS end-to-end all the time because it's actually harder to support an environment that does both. You end up with mixed content errors and users complaining about what that is. So it's actually easier if you can to use an HTTPS environment. And this is configured in the ArcGIS Server Administrator Directory, which we referred to in the previous section, under the Security Config Update section. Just pull down. You don't like the experience, you can change it back. It's not going to break you if you don't like how that works. So the next thing I'll recommend is to disable the services directory. And this sounds pretty scary when I say this because people use this all the time. And the first thing that a lot of people think of when I suggest this is that, hey, that's going to break all my apps because all my apps use REST, right? That's a terrible suggestion. Well, the reality is when you do this, what will effectively happen is when an end user specifically browses the REST services directory, they're going to no longer see this, they're going to see this. It will not break your apps though, because your apps don't browse the REST services directory. They know what they want to do. And I can say for 100% certainty this will work just fine with your apps because ArcGIS Online does this by default. ArcGIS Online does not expose the REST services directory. You can't just browse it. So I know this has no functional impact. For developers though, and I realize a lot of you, those you guys are here are developers. Leave this on in your dev sites. That's fine. You want to see what these, what the query endpoints do for you. That's important. But I'm talking about production servers now. There's really not a good reason to leave this open. And from a compliance perspective, it's pretty important because what you're doing here, if you don't disable this, is you're giving a scanner or an attacker a complete menu of all the things that your product can do, and it will light up a scanner like a Christmas tree. So it's one real easy, click, and it's disabled, and your scans come back much cleaner. They don't complain about exposed endpoints and things like that. So I highly recommend you do this. It's an easy win. Disabling the REST service directory is a simple task, and it's easy to go back and forward, so it's not like a one-way street. If you don't like the experience, you can undo it quite easily. Again, it's under the server administrator directory, and all you're doing is unchecking a box that's by default enabled under system handlers REST services directory. So again, you check that box, you hit save, services directory is no longer browsable. You want to turn it back on, check the box on, save, services directory is available. Your server won't restart, nothing like that. So it's real easy to flip it on and off with no risk. So the next thing to talk about is cores. Cross-origin resource sharing is kind of like a dark term. It's associated with a lot of frustration. And I'll admit, this is a more complicated piece of guidance to implement because it requires you to actually know all the front-end websites that your servers are going to serve to. So if jeff.smith is one website that my server will serve data to, I have to know that. It's not always an easy thing to know. Not everybody implements this control, but it is in our best practices, and at least in terms of compliance, it's a common finding in scans. But this is basically a way of controlling what your ArcGIS servers are willing to serve data to. So in a normal cores behavior, a web browser will make or a client will make a request to a web application like ArcGIS.com or the portal interface or maybe your own app. And that client browser will also make a side request that is invisible to the end user to your ArcGIS server. That's how the APIs work. That's how it's worked for quite a long time. That side load request is also associated with attack vectors. So that's why this comes up in scans and this becomes a compliance item in some organizations. So what we really want to do is we want to control, we're going to tell ArcGIS server, hey, I want to limit what you're willing to serve that data to. It's kind of interesting because it's really a client-side control. What ends up happening is server delivers a valid resource that says, I'm willing to serve data to jeff.smith or greg.ponto, but not joe.smith or something like that. And so the way that's implemented is you basically whitelist all the allowed origins within the ArcGIS Server Administrator services directory. You have to whitelist each one, HTTP and HTTPS. You don't have to list all the context paths, but you do have to list the fully qualified domain names. This is impactful. Okay, so that if you do this wrong, what will happen is users will complain that the services don't load in their map. The server is not harmed by this operation. It's not like it changes the way server itself behaves. What it actually does is it changes the way the client behaves. So the client will refuse to side load data from a server if the website that it's on is not whitelisted. If you don't like the result, switch it back to star. So this is kind of an iterative process, and it's something you got to do in a dev/staging environment where you're able to validate the results. But once you get it in there, it's good. The thing though is there's some maintenance here, and you have to update this periodically for any new website. So like I said, if you're a public solution and you're serving out to the whole wide world, this is going to have to be star because you're not going to know who's going to use your stuff. But if you have some control over what websites you want to serve your content to, this is a way that you can enact that control. And with that, I'll go ahead and let Jeff demo this for us.
All right, thanks, Greg. As Greg said, the cores functionality or the restrictions can be controlled within the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory. I'm logged in here as an administrator. I click on System, and I click on Handlers, REST, Services directory. Now, by default, as Greg said, by default, it's, the allowed origins is, we've got the asterisk there, so it's open to everyone. So if I edit this, and just as an example, I'll put in https arcgis.com. Now, a couple things are kind of going along with what Greg said. This controls or restricts cores requests. This is not a form of securing and saying, okay, nobody, only this server can access my services. This means only this server could make a cores request to my services. And as Greg explained, sometimes that's hard to conceptualize or understand. So I want to give a little demo here, just showing the network traffic that we see both with and without cores and the impact it has. So I've got a feature service here, public feature service, open to everyone, installed on my system. And I'm going to open that up in the ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. Now what we'll see here and what I expect to see, make sure this works, the map will still display because a cores request is not made to display the map service. But what is needed in order to edit the map service is a CORS request. And that's why we are getting this error right here. And I forgot to turn on Fiddler to capture the traffic. So let's try this once again. Because this is where we can see exactly what's going on. Okay, this request right here initially made the REST info request. This is the map viewer makes this request to determine if CORS is enabled. I see this. This is the header right here. This indicates, okay, this is going to be a CORS request. I've got an origin header, and the origin is HTTP, www.arcgis.com. Now the response to indicate whether or not CORS is supported, if CORS were supported, we'd see an access control allow origin response header. And we don't see that there. So map viewer knows, okay, CORS is not supported. The next attempt down here, we see map viewer tries to make a proxy request to the service. Since this is on an internal network, ArcGIS Online cannot access my machine on this network. And so ArcGIS Online, the map viewer, throws this error right here and says, okay, you're on an internal network. You can see the service, you can query the service, you just cannot edit the service. So now, let's clear this out and make one change. Now the restriction, what I made in the ArcGIS administrator directory is I set it to HTTPS. So if I just change this request to map viewer to HTTPS, maybe, let's try it. Now, while that's loading, here's that REST info request, again with the origin header. This time, we got under security access control allow credentials and access control allow origin. That indicates yes, CORS is supported, and for some reason the utility service is acting a little slowly. But what will happen, or what I anticipate to happen here, is there it goes. Notice the edit icon is there. So now this feature service is fully editable. So
awesome, thank you, Jeff. So guys, it's tough to do a security demo, let me tell you, because you're trying to make something break the way you want it to break, but not the way you don't want it to break. Hats off to Jeff for handling that. Security demos are really tough. Anyway, so the next thing I want to talk about is just a basic thing within your ArcGIS server to ensure that you don't over allocate privileges on your installation directory, on your most importantly on your config store and your server directories. That's where your data is going to live, and some sensitive content about the configuration of the system. This is often overlooked. I work with a lot of customers by traveling on site, and I find this all the time, that this will be either shared with everyone or all users. And so the misconception is that, well, I have security on my web server, so I'm fine. I didn't even think about the files on disk. But that is part of security, considering all vectors, and one vector is to protect the files on disk. It's a unlikely, I should say, attack vector, but those are sometimes the ones that get exploited because we think, oh, it's no big deal. It's on a disk, on a server, in a data center. It's nice and safe. Still shouldn't ignore the fact that all that really needs to have access to these files is the ArcGIS server process account, the one that if you run Task Manager or PS in Linux, this is the account that's running your ArcGIS server. That's the only one that needs access to it, needs full control, but that's it. So you don't need to have every user in your organization access this location. So another item to consider if you can is to disable the primary site administrator account. This comes up we have a security scan tool that Jeff authored, thank you for that, which finds this and reports this as a potential finding to correct. The basic reason why this is worth doing is because often this is never managed. People forget about this account. They don't rotate the password to it. Maybe it gets stored in unsecure places. It's easy to do because it's effectively a shared account, and from a compliance perspective, it can be a problem because shared accounts aren't always permitted under certain compliance protocols. So if you can disable this account, create another account for yourself, for your users. Basically ensure that you have each user and administrator really should have a unique account that they're using to act on the system. Really shouldn't be using a shared account if you can all avoid it. So throughout this presentation, you'll see all these kind of hardening items coming flying at you, and it's kind of a lot to digest. And the server team, which Jeff is helped to author this, has worked very hard to develop a scan tool, an Esri authored scan tool, that can very quickly scan your server, non-invasive scan, which is, by the way, a big deal. I do a lot of security scans, and I've taken out quite a few systems at the knees and had some pretty pissed off directors hunting me down for doing that. This is a very low risk, basically no risk scan you can run on your server, and it'll tell you what's wrong, right? It'll tell you, hey, you've got your REST services directories enabled, your primary site administrator account is open. Hey, you've got services that you've shared with everyone, they're editable. My gosh, I didn't know that, right? So it's a really good tool, and it covers everything we've covered in this session so far. So if you take nothing else away, refer to this scan tool. There's one for portal, there's one for server. Great tool for help you through hardening your system, and it even grades it depending on criticality. And I'll go ahead and turn this over to Jeff to give us a demo of that.
Thanks, Greg. The server scan utility, I've got a shortcut here, but it's under the server installation folder, ArcGIS server, tools, admin, and there are a group of Python scripts here, but the one that we're particularly interested in is called server scan. And I can double click on it. In this case, I've got Python, so it opens it up in Python automatically. But when I run it, if I'm running on the machine that I want to scan, I can just accept the default host name at the top. I need an administrator username, an administrator password, and again, you can change the output directory if you want to. This is if you don't have rights to or don't have permissions to write to the output directory where it is by default, then you might have to move it. In particular, if you've adjusted the permissions like Greg explained earlier for the installation folder. But in this case, I'll run it, and the output is an HTML file. You can open it up, and as Greg described, it categorizes the items that it found based on severity, critical, important, and recommended, and describes the property tested and the scan results. The nice thing, and this is in the latest, the 10.5 security scan, where we actually added a help link to the end of each issue. So you want to know, okay, well, I see that right now it found that I'm not enforcing standardized queries. Well, where do I go to change that? I'll click on more info. It takes you to the help doc. It says explicitly, all right, well, here's exactly what needs to be done to enable or disable that. And so each of the items that it finds, it has a help link.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's switch back. So we're going to shift gears a little bit now, talk about Portal for ArcGIS. The recommendations are actually quite similar, as you'll find. And at the end, again, we're going to refer to that scan tool script for Portal. The thing you should really take away from these sessions is those scan tool scripts, because all this other information is really just context taking you through what those items mean and how to kind of enforce them and what impact they may have on your solution. So just like in ArcGIS Server, you want to enable HTTPS communication. This is another recommendation for Portal. The only caveat, the only impact I would caution you to with this setting is that this is going to enforce HTTPS for all items in your portal too. So if you are bringing in a lot of content from external vendors or resources and they're coming in over HTTP, checking that box will effectively break those content items. I mean, it's not going to hurt them, but users won't be able to load them. So this is one of those, we recommend it. It's basically a recommendation because the world is moving to HTTPS, and we kind of need to move with it. Again, refer to things like geolocation being disabled if it's not used. If you have vendors that are supplying data to you and they can only supply it over HTTP, contact them and say, do you have an HTTPS endpoint that I can replace my link to, so I can enable this and actually better secure my solution. Just like in ArcGIS Server, which has an API for automation and delivery to our APIs or to our our apps. Portal has the same thing. Portal has a sharing directory. It's RESTful sharing directory. And just like ArcGIS Server, it's an advertisement for every capability that Portal offers. It's great for a developer, and you want to leave it enabled on your developer systems, but it's also great for an attacker, and it's great for a scanner to just crawl through your portal and find all the kinds of things that it can potentially poke at and prod at, and it's really not a good thing to leave on production servers. Again, this is not going to break your systems. This is one of those low-risk, easy wins. It's huge for scanning. It basically shuts the door on scan engines' ability to probe and prod at the endpoint and report, issues. So, and I shouldn't even say it doesn't hide the issues. It eliminates them. A lot of these scan tools I refer to things. I'm not going to mention any vendors' names. It's fine. But they produce these big reports, and then these reports come to you and they say, fix all this stuff, right? This one will fix like 90% of the findings in there. Because what those scanners do is they often report HTML forms exploits, which this has because it's a developer tool. So again, do consider disabling this. And again, it's not going to hurt your apps because I can say ArcGIS Align runs this disabled. You can't browse the ArcGIS Align sharing API. You shouldn't be able to browse yours in production either. It's very safe to disable it. It's very easy to re-enable it. So. To disable it, you can edit it within the Portal Administrator directory in the security configuration. It's a JavaScript tag. You switch it from Disable Services directory to false, from false to true. If you don't like the outcome, or if you have the developer screaming at you, please turn it back on, please turn it back on, although I would consider that with caution, you can always set it back to false and it will become enabled again. So a really important thing to consider, our product ships with a proxy. The proxy is used with a number of functions. It enables to access to things like WMS services. It enables you to store credentials and pull services into your portal. It has a lot. It's a really useful, powerful tool. But we do not know what you are going to use it for. So it comes open. It comes enabled open by default. Open proxies are very good for making it very easy for you to add remote sites, and that's into your portal as items. That is the point. That is one of the use cases shown here. So basically what we're doing is we're pulling in maybe a non-CORS compliant site. Maybe it's an HTTP site that won't give you an HTTPS endpoint. It's kind of like this smooth it over tool, right? So we use it a lot, and so you want to be aware of what you're using it for, because it can also be used by an attacker. So the same proxy can be used to attack the local system. It can be used to attack a remote system on your network. It can be used to attack an external client on the internet and make the attack look like it came from your portal. So instead of them beating down the hacker's door, they're beating down your door. Why are you attacking my servers? So this is why it's really important. It's a critical practice to narrow this down, to use the whitelist that's built into it. And that is covered here. So within the security configuration of the Portal Administrator directory, there is an allowed proxy hosts tag that you can set. Well, it is set. And by default, it's open to anyone. Because again, we don't know what your remote targets are going to be. So here you can add a comma-separated list of wildcard values, if you like, and that's probably what you'd end up doing, for all the domains that you basically trust. So you might put arcgis.com in there. That's a common one because of utility services and things like that. But you want to put like your data vendors, services. You'd want to put the local machines in your network that you may need to pull proxy data from. But it really shouldn't be allowed to everyone, allowed to all. If your portals are behind a firewall and you have control of the users on your network, and you can basically ensure that you essentially trust the agents on your network, this is less of a risk. But if you have a public-facing portal, you got to do this. You really, really got to do this. This is really important because the risk is really just too high to leave it open. Another item we talk about is, Portal is a really useful and easy to use, friendly kind of product, and it comes packaged with the ability to create accounts on the fly. So when you first sign into your portal, there's this blue button on the left side of the screen that says create an account, and that's great for enabling users to self-service login information or to self-service their accounts. But it's also great for unauthorized users to create an account in your portal, and for those unauthorized users to access data that's shared with your organization. There's a group in Portal called your organization. A lot of people share content with it. I think that's perfectly safe. That's perfectly fine. If this button is enabled, it means that really anyone that can access your portal can become part of your organization and can access that shared data. Now, you really shouldn't share content with your whole organization that you consider highly sensitive, but that just may be your practice. And if it is, consider disabling this button. It's done inside the Portal Administrator Directory. The property is just disable signup, set it to true. If you don't like the result, remove that property, set it to false, then it'll come back. Just a key item to do, especially if you have a public-facing portal. This is one of those big ones. If you have a public-facing portal, you don't want the whole world to just be able to create accounts in your portal. Even if you don't consider security a big item, licensing, right? You're just going to burn a bunch of licenses with this. So do consider disabling that button. And again, the question might be, why do we even have it enabled in the first place? Well, again, you may want self-service accounts. So Portal has a lot of functions like that that are designed to be friendly and usable out of the box, but they just may not be appropriate for every deployment. Another item to think about is this trusted servers property. This is one of my favorite features. It came out, I think, around 10.4, and it solved a ton of challenges that I would have with services that weren't just using our built-in security. So if you have PKI-based or Windows authentication-based or HTTP-based authentication services, if you have OGC services that are secured, what happens is Portal will attempt to use its proxy to call those things. And if it does, it will not be successful. All you have to do is add the fully qualified domain names of those servers here. This is not a restriction. It just changes the behavior of the Esri apps in Portal so that they allow the client to go directly to those services, which is a more natural flow. So basically add any servers you trust to this list. It's not going to hurt anything. It's only going to help you. And so here's kind of a play-by-play of how that looks. So normally, when a client browser or a client contacts a web application in Portal, and that web application adds a resource that's not federated with the portal and requires authentication model like PKI, Windows authentication, something like that, the proxy inside Portal will try to grab it, but the proxy doesn't support that kind of workflow. So it won't be able to handle the authentication. It's not you, it's this proxy call. It doesn't have your authentication information. That trusted servers changes that communication to look like this. That's all it does. And again, if you don't like the result, you can just remove them. It doesn't cause a restart of your site, but it can solve a lot of problems. If you have problems connecting to OGC services, this might be your answer. Yeah, I've had a number of customers in professional services that we've had. I just can't figure this out. We don't know what's wrong. We need you to come on site. It's a huge problem. We're willing to spend a huge amount of hours on it. And we come in and I'd love to burn like 200 hours on it, and but it takes like 1 minute, and we leave, right? Had that happen twice so far. So anyway, go ahead and let you demo trusted servers there, Jeff.
Thank you, Greg. Now, as Greg said, for the trusted servers, this really impacts the services that are secured with web tier authentication, be it PKI, IWA, basic authentication. You see it a lot with OGC services. I mean, in the demo that I'll show you right here is just with an ArcGIS server service secured with basic authentication. That's all I have. So in this case, I'm going to open up a map. I've got a feature service. And again, this impacts for ArcGIS server services. This impacts feature services because we need that CORS request. What we displayed before with restricting the CORS, now this feature we're not restricting or trying to guard the CORS request. We just weren't trying to say, okay, yeah, it's safe to send credentials with that CORS request. So if I add a feature service here, it's a feature service that I've got hosted out in the cloud, North Carolina feature service. And I need to input credentials. Let's type that in right. Now it recognizes it, it draws it, and it's trying to read it, and we're going to get an error message. Now again, this is very, very, very similar to the error we saw previously with the CORS request. I mean, in this case, we're accessing it. We're not able to access it via a CORS request because we need to send the credentials with the CORS request. And in Map Viewer, in Portal, and ArcGIS Online is not going to send credentials by default. That's a very insecure method if someone were to try to implement or create a web application or make a CORS request and have your credentials be automatically sent. You don't want that. So in this case, let's go into Portal. I'm logged in as an administrator. Under My Organizations, Settings, Security, we have the trusted servers. Now, all we need here is the host name of the server. We don't need the HTTP or the protocol in front of it. There we are. All right, we added that. We save it. Now, if we go back to this map, let's go ahead and create a new map just to start fresh. Add the layer. Let's get the URL here. Now it's not going to prompt me this time for my credentials because it's already cached. But notice it loads right away. The edit button is there. Everything worked great. Now this, it's kind of hard. You know, like I said, we can see the services for the maps or for the feature service. You can query, you can see the data there. You just can't edit it. This becomes particularly important for OGC services, though, that are secured with web tier authentication, because you won't even be able to see them. It relies solely on that CORS request to even be able to view the service. And without this, if it's secured with web tier authentication, you won't be able to see the OGC service in the map viewer here.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so that trusted servers, it really just comes down to add servers that you trust, and you can make that list as long as you like, and it's only going to help you. So with the same thing with the GIS server, the scan tool, again, that Jeff's team has created, which is great. Effectively the same tool exists in Portal. All this guidance, all this discussion, just remember the scan tool. The scan tool will tell you where there's gaps. It'll tell you what to do. It'll give you a link to the help to address it. It's a great, like, Swiss Army knife. The scan takes almost no time to execute. It's very safe, and you should run it, you know, as often as you feel is necessary to continue, like, work iteratively to harden your solution. And with that, I'll go ahead and let Jeff demo that scan tool for us. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Again, very similar to the last one, the Portal scan, it's another Python script. It's comes with the Portal installation folder under Tools, Security. In this case, there's only one script in there. So again, very similar to the server side. If I want to run the scan on the server where I'm running the script from, I can accept the default host name here. I need an administrator username, a password. I can select a different output directory if I want to. And very similar, it's an HTML output file. Open it up in a browser. And again, it's categorized based on severity, critical, important, and recommended. It doesn't, our help document lists actually all of the items that it checks for. But in this case, similar to the server side, if any of the items that it finds, it includes a help link to how to address those items. And,
so you see that anonymous access one? That's like my favorite one right there. because it is so hard to just, I mean, how do you normally do that? You go through your portal or your ArcGIS server and like, did somebody share this with everyone? I don't know. Oh, it's editable, my gosh. How long has it been like that? I love that feature. That is so great. You know, in managed services, we use that all the time. It helps us stay on top of those cases. We actually run this semi-daily to kind of catch those kinds of things. So that's a really great tool. Again, thank you, Jeff, for that. Okay, advanced topics, 10.5 topics. This covers kind of both bases, but this very much relates to the ArcGIS Enterprise model where we have portal federated with an ArcGIS server or securing an ArcGIS server. This content essentially relates to that. That's those sections. So maybe it's not an advanced topic. The reality is there's been a lot of advances in the password control that is available in Portal for ArcGIS. So we used to just have a default password policy, which is shown on the left side. This is 8 characters long, relatively simple passwords. This may be enough for you, but if you're an organization that has compliance and policy requirements for more secure passwords, the example on the right shows the federal standard, 14 characters, very complex passwords, remembering 24 historical passwords, 60 days old, things like that. So this is one that if you have those policy requirements, you should be setting. If you don't, you might consider setting it. It does frustrate users a little bit, I guess, because they might be used to using simple passwords, but simple passwords are easy to break and they're not really a good security practice. So consider setting that in Portal, My Organization, under Settings, Security, and Update Password Policy. So SSL TLS, this is the protocol that governs how HTTPS flows over the wire. The 10.4 release supports both TLS 1.0 through 1.2. These are the only these are the only protocols, I should say, that are considered safe in the wild right now. And some organizations have more rigorous security requirements, which don't even permit TLS 1.0. In that case, it is possible to set both the ciphers and the protocol that you're using for HTTPS within Portal and server to be more compliant with your organization's policies. One thing I would draw your attention to, though, is, and this is not an Esri website or anything, but the Qualys SSL Labs is a great resource for HTTPS information. It can do things like scan your environment, tell you if you have things you wouldn't even think about, like bad chains in your certificates, or soon to expire certificates, or weak ciphers, things like that. But particularly this this section, the user agent capabilities, is an important consideration when you're thinking about restricting your environment to only support, say, TLS 1.2, because not every client supports TLS 1.2. So on the left side of this this table, this company does a great job of articulating every version of every client that's pretty much in the wild and whether or not it supports, and this is this region here, TLS. So I'm not necessarily advocating you push back to your security team, but if you are pressed to enforce TLS 1.2 or some other cipher, you can always refer back to this site and say, well, at least I know what's going to break and what's not going to break. The reality is if you have browsers and mobile devices that have been developed or patched in the last 2 years, you should be fine. But still, consider this. If you have very ancient devices that you're trying to support, or very ancient browsers, very ancient operating systems, Windows XP, things like that, you will definitely cut your nose off to spite your face if you over-harden your TLS configuration. So specifying cipher suites is something you can set in the security SSL certificates section of the Portal Administrator Directory. This is also configurable in ArcGIS Server in the Administrator Directory. And if this stuff looks like Greek to you, or you don't have a specific list of ciphers that you're required to align to, then you don't have to worry about changing this. But if you do, have your security team tell you, what ciphers do you want me to support? I can put anything you want in this box, you just tell me. And that's pretty much it for that. So, okay. 10.5 topics. A Allow portal access and collaboration. These are very hotly anticipated features. Lots of enhancement requests around the need to share content within your portal, and that's great. I mean, that's awesome stuff because it now becomes possible to engage either remote portals or portals in different departments, share data across portals. And one of the first features that we talk about, which isn't quite collaboration, and is this allow portal access feature. And allow portal access basically allows the Esri apps in your portal to pull in remote services from another portal and render their SAML dialog. That's all it does. That's what it's for. If you don't have this use case, you don't have to worry about it. But a lot of people did have this use case. And previously, we had a limitation where the only thing that would pop up when you pulled a remote portal service into yours was the minimal token dialog. You basically couldn't use SAML across all your portals. So this addresses that limitation. I'm just going to move on. Time, right? Actually, yeah. Do you want to go ahead and do you have time to demo that?
I can do it quick.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. I'll keep this demo quick here. But this is related to the allow portal access. What I've got here is a portal out in the cloud that I've got configured with enterprise authentication, or SAML. So I've got a user out here. I log in as that user. This user has published a hosted feature service. Let's see if this wants to come up. Called LA Boundaries. And you can see right here, it's not shared with anyone. That means this user and only this user can access this. Now, if let me just, so the prompt shows up on the screen. Let me sign out of this user. And I'm going to log into the portal that I've got here. Sign in. I'll go ahead and sign in as an administrator. Okay, now map. Get a copy of this. So by default, I have not added the allow portal access. I can access the service, but only if I have a built-in account. I cannot use my enterprise account to access the service. Now, this is how it's been for a while, and some people have, or a lot of organizations have just gotten accustomed to maybe having a built-in account to get around this. So now, if I log back into my machine in the cloud, and under Edit Settings, Security, Allow Portal Access, what I want to do here is add this right here. I need the HTTPS, my portal host name, and the context of my portal. I click Add Portal. This is only available in 10.5 and later. If my portal were a 10.4.1 portal, I would get an error message here saying you can't use this. This feature is brand new in 10.5 and only supported in 10.5. But I click Save. Now, if I go back to my map, get the URL here, and I add that same layer to the map. Before I add it, let me log out of this because I don't want this to know that I'm logged in here. Click Add Layer. Now, what happens? I get a pop-up that says, please sign in to continue. And then I get my own portal login screen. This is an OAuth request that's happening behind the scenes. And so I'm able to sign in. If I want to use my admin account, I still can. Or I can log in with my enterprise account. And it still has it cached. But it logged me in with that AGS user 1 account, and here I have access to the LA boundaries layer.
Awesome, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
So from a developer, you hear the word collaboration, you've probably seen some demos on it. You might be asking yourself, what do I need to think about as a developer? What do I need to worry about? What do I need to know? The reality is, if you're a developer and you've registered your app with one portal and it's collaborated to another portal, and your app happens to be in the group that collaborates to that remote portal, it means your app registration, yes, will be copied to that remote portal. Does that mean you need to change your code? No, it doesn't mean you need to change your code. It doesn't really mean anything for you. It's nothing you have to worry about. So if you're a developer and you're worried about this, you can basically walk out of here saying, nothing for me to worry about, no big deal, my code's gonna work fine. The reason is because when the user opens up the app that might be registered in the remote portal, effectively they're just gonna get a link back to the original portal. It's not gonna change anything about the way they experience the app or anything, so it's no big deal from a developer perspective. You don't have to think about special OAuth processes or app ID processes, nothing like that. It'll be just fine. Now, from an administrator perspective, there are some things you got to think about in terms of collaboration and security, really in the context of risk. So a collaboration, is a way to expose data and services to remote portals or for you to consume them. That openness, that capability translates to some risk. The rule of thumb that I'm going to give you is if you're going to collaborate services. That's the safest thing to do. The nice thing about collaborating services, the data never flows to the remote portal. You don't ever lose control of it. You don't lose control of the security model. The security model is maintained on the original hosting portal. Collaborating a service to a remote portal is not unlike collaborating an app. It's basically a link, a reference. Your security doesn't change. The remote portal administrator doesn't have the ability to share that with everyone. I mean, he can, but all he's doing is sharing the reference. He's not actually sharing the service. They'll still get challenged. They'll still have to have credentials for the original service. So it's effectively a low-risk operation. Now, a more moderate risk operation is sharing data items, something like you've uploaded a CSV or an Excel file or a zip file, and you opted to collaborate that with a remote portal. At that point, you're letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, because in this way, the remote portal is going to get a copy of the data. Now, the integrity will be maintained. So that's why I say this is a moderate risk. It's a confidentiality risk, though. When I say the integrity will be maintained, if the remote portal opts to change that data, your sending portal will send a new version. So you will be able to maintain the integrity of the data, but you can't control who necessarily has access to it. You have to trust that remote portal to control access to that data appropriately. So in some ways, this is something you'd want to avoid, unless, say, you were building like a departmental portal and your intention was exactly to do this, to basically distribute data. So collaborating data is a moderate risk. Now, consider the high risk possibility that comes up when you collaborate, though. When your portal collaborates to another portal, that portal can collaborate to another portal and another portal. You effectively have established transitive trust. And with data items, this becomes a much higher risk because you might have an agreement with your partner, but you don't necessarily know that your partner has an agreement with his partner, right? So again, the rule of thumb here, coming back to this, is if you're unsure of what to do when you collaborate items in portal, collaborate services. Don't collaborate data unless you really want to essentially distribute it, because that's what you're going to effectively do. Okay, so just some best practices with respect to collaboration. Trust your partners you're collaborating with, because you're effectively establishing transitive trust. If that partner chooses another partner, you're effectively partnering with them. Share service items instead of data, if at all possible, unless it's your intention to distribute data. And establish new groups for collaboration if you can. This basically is to avoid the scenario of, oopsie, I didn't realize that there was 100 data items in that group and I just collaborated that to a remote portal and it's out there, cat's out of the bag, security breach, confidentiality risk, yada, yada, yada. Establish new groups for collaboration, move items into those groups for the purpose of collaboration. That's a much safer practice. Again, unless your intention is, I fully understand that all the items in this group will in fact be shared and collaborated, not just shared, but effectively copied to that remote portal. So collaboration is really great for departmental workflows. It's also potentially useful for external portals as long as you have established a firm trust with those remote portals. So takeaways from the session today. we talked about a lot of concepts, hardening, things like that. Just use the scan scripts. The scan scripts are there to deal with the complexity for you. They'll tell you what to do. They'll link you to the help. That's the easy thing to do with servers. Same thing with Portal. Scan script, scan script. Don't worry about every little detail of what we covered. It'll come back to you when the script says, oh, disable service directory. I remember Greg talked about that. You know, that's no big deal. I can do that. But just run the scripts. It'll tell you what to do. For developers, if you are hosting an app that's hosting an app in a portal that is collaborated with another portal, nothing to worry about. No big deal. Your apps will still work. That's basically the takeaway from that. And admins, collaborate carefully, particularly when sharing data items, because the cat is basically out of the bag at that point. So unless you really, really intend to distribute the data items, don't share data items unless that's what you specifically intend to distribute them, because that's what you're effectively doing. Just some other sessions, I'll leave this up, that you guys may want to consider. Security-related sessions, some of the content that you may have expected in this but didn't see because of lack of time. We have a bunch of other sessions. I only showed the ones that are going forward from today. So tomorrow there's a number of sessions that cover similar concepts related to Portal and ArcGIS Server and some security topics. And then Friday we do this again at 1 o'clock. So if you had such a great time, you want to come back and do it all over again, we're here on Friday.